MODO's modeling toolset is powerful, versatile, and very flexible. Now, I'm currently in the model quad layout where we have all of our modeling tools here in the tool menu, and we also have orthographic views as well as a perspective view. And I wanted to start out in this layout because it's a good way to work with reference imagery to create your actual item, to have backdrop references as you model. Now we have the plane in the scene right now with the actual image on top of that plane, correctly mapped to it. But what we can do now is either we can create a backdrop item that we can continue to model here in the orthographic views, or we can even do cool things like come over to the topology view, come over to settings, and click on background and change that to same as active, which it currently is, add item, mesh item, and now you can see our image is showing up on the plane as a backdrop item. We have a new empty mesh layer, and if you want, you can actually use our topology tools to build out the base geometry that you can then thicken. And so if I hold down the control key while I'm in any component mode, left click and drag out, I've got my initial geometry, and this is just a really cool way of beginning the modeling process, especially if you have some reference that you want to be very specific. We will go through the topology tools more so in an upcoming video. However, I wanted to kind of point out that the topology tools aren't really just for topology. They can even be used for starting off your base geometry in many senses. So really, really great tools. All you have to do, as you saw I drew out polys, was Control, left click to create a new polygon. And if you want to connect to existing geometry, just grab an edge, a vertex, or a polygon by hovering over and left clicking and drag that on down so it snaps to the geometry around it. And if I undo that, I can do this with the vertices as well, as you can see. And if I want to create new geometry from the geometry that's already been created, I just hold down the Shift key, left click, and drag on out, and I can create that new geometry. I can also hold down the Shift key and middle click, and that will slice, and you can see as long as I hold that down and slide the mouse up and down, it will slide through the polys. Really great stuff, and I have these quick selections. So it's a great way to work, and I'll point that out because really topology is just as useful in your base modeling process. Now, if you want to just go ahead and approach this from a more kind of standard method, I'm going to create a new mesh layer, come back to the model quad, and I want to show you how you can add this image as a backdrop item inside your orthographic viewports. So if I come down here to my right orthographic viewport and click on wireframe and come down and change that to advanced OpenGL, as long as I have this item selected, I'll be able to see it. And I can also make active and inactive meshes the same, so it's always visible. But we want to be able to see the wireframe at all times. That's kind of one of the nice things about the orthographic view. So what we need to do is add a backdrop item, add item, backdrop item. And let's go ahead and come down to the backdrop item properties, down to image, click on diffuse, come down to projection type, change that to right. You can see it move from this orthographic view to this one. And it's humongous. It's oriented correctly, but it also needs to be flipped. So let's flip it. Let's add some transparency so we can see through it. And we need to scale it down. Now you can just grab the scale tool if you want to and scale it down, or you can adjust the pixel size. The pixel size is the size of each pixel in the image you've loaded into the backdrop item. And you can actually set a default size for that. Right now it's at 10 millimeters per pixel. And what I want to do is just grab this handle, pull it on down, and change the pixel size to like 2.3, maybe 2.4. And unfortunately, as you get down to fine levels, like I'm having a hard time really tweaking and tuning it so it fits the size exactly. You can hold down the control key, and now I have fine steps. You see, now I'm just moving between 2.4 and 2.5 really, but in very fine steps as opposed to the way I was before. So really nice tweaking and tuning controls that works with a lot of tools in MODO. We really only needed the paint plane if we wanted to do topology stuff, or if we wanted to paint silhouettes or paint in general on top of our reference object, and also for that initial scale reference for baking. So now I'm going to turn it off. Really didn't even notice any difference because we have the backdrop item visible in the perspective view as well as the orthographic view. I currently offset this in the x-axis so that when I start to model, it's not overlapping anything. Press the space bar to drop that, and we can begin the modeling process in either the perspective view or the orthographic view. Let's come to that empty mesh layer that we created, and let's hold down the control key and click on the cube tool. Now we have a perfect 1 meter cube in the center of our scene. come over to polygon component mode, press the R key, and in the perspective view, hold down the control key and scale this on in. This cube is perfectly centered at our origin, so we know that it is currently symmetrical as well, and so we have symmetry as long as we're cautious. And all right, so I'll press the W key to get my transform move handles and move this right to the base of my sickle object. And let's grab the polygon here on the top, press the W key for the move tool, move it up to the top of the sickle. And now let's start talking about some interesting ways to modify the geometry and ways to utilize really cool features in MODO, such as the work plane, our Falloffs, and the action centers. So, all right, here we have a very, very simple polygon object, right? And I want to be able to rotate this object from down here at the bottom because I want the orientation of this base poly to match the bottom of the actual pole or staff. So I'm going to press the E key, and I've got this rotate handle right in the center of my object. That's kind of, it's fine. I can keep on moving things around, but I'm going to go ahead and press Alt F because that changes my action center to screen mode. And now if I left click in the viewport, I can actually change the location where I'm rotating from. So now if I move out so you can see everything, I can rotate this and it rotates right there from the base nicely. So easy ways to move things around. Press the W key, just click and drag in the viewport, and I'm able to get that into orientation. All right, so we need some more geometry though. So come into edge component mode, select an edge, press Alt plus C, or come over to the mesh edit menu, and that will be the loop slice. Click in the viewport, and I'm going to bring my count all the way down to 1 here in the tool properties and start increasing the count so you can see the adding of geometry. And I just wanted to try and make very nice square polygons because I'm going to be sculpting on top of this basic form to kind of come up with my idea. And now let's come over to the deform menu, come over to the bend tool. The bend tool has a fall off built into it. And so let's click right down here at the base. You'll notice it immediately creates that fall off in the correct orientation. And this is kind of establishing how far you're falling off and at what angle. So if I rotate this, the bend tool will allow me to bend this object backwards. And furthermore, I can continue to grab the handle and tweak and tune it in such a way that I have a little bit more control over how it's bending. And so let me get that right on top. All right, I've got a nice shape that I'm happy with. And now I can start using really cool stuff like our actual fall-off tools and more action centers. So check this out, right? I want to make the top of the pole a little bit broader than the base, or actually a lot broader, because it's going to be like the head and the shoulders and stuff like that. So I'm going to select all these edges from here on up, press the L key for loop, and then select all the edges at the top. Make sure none of these edges are selected. All right. And now I'm going to come over to Action Center, and I'm going to change my fall off type to local. And now when I press the R key for Scale tool, you'll notice that it aligns to actually an individual loop. Really, this is actually aligned to every single loop independent of one another. So if I hold down the Control key and scale, you see how it scales just each loop independently. Really great way of being able to work. I can also come over to my fall offs and use fall off linear, left click and drag out to create the fall off and drag that on up. And now when I press the R key to scale, hold down the Control key, and I scale it on out, it scales outward with our fall off. So really nice and easy ways of working. We also can change, move this on up, our shape preset to things like linear, ease out, smooth, all sorts of great presets for that. You can also set your in and your out values independently or on your own. All right, so let's go ahead with that. Ease in or ease out. You know what? I like linear. I'm going to drop it right there. And we want to make some adjustments to the bottom. Now, there are plenty of other ways to do this too. Let's drop this fall off, come into polygon component mode, select this poly at the bottom. And MODO has great selection tools. So Shift plus the up arrow key will select all polys surrounding. And I want to select all the way up to right where it tapered the most. And I want to go ahead and use a fall off selection. And let's go ahead and use the push tool, deform and push, and click in the viewport. Now we have the push tool. And now I can push this, and we have a selection fall off that I can modify in the tool properties you see right here, and kind of make that just become a little bit broader as we get to the bottom. Press the spacebar to drop that. And so really great stuff. You can combine your action centers and your fall offs in really, really interesting ways. Now, what if I want to be able to align to like a particular like object, right? And I want that to become like the origin or something like that. Check this out. Work planes are really, really cool because maybe I want to scale this whole object also up as well as out in all other directions. So I want to make sure that I'm not scaling from the center. You see like right here, that's kind of an awkward place to be scaling from. It's not quite right. I want to scale from right down here. How would you do that? I'm going to come into edge selection mode, L for loop, work plane, align work plane to selection, and that gray grid that was in the background, that's our work plane. And if you noticed, it aligned to my selection. So since I have that selected now, I can even come into action center origin, and you see it aligns right to the center of that work plane. So now if I come back to my polygon selection that I have right there, press the R key for scale, and I can scale from that bottom location with the fall off present or off if you don't want it. So really, really cool stuff as far as ways to being able to control your modeling. And of course, we barely touched on most of the modeling tools in here in MODO already, but you can already see the power of it. Now press Shift plus Tab to make a Pixar subdivision surface. Now what this does is it automatically smooths your mesh. It adds more geometry, but all you can access are these existing points, edges, and polygons that are on your base mesh, but it smooths everything out. And there's a lot of great advantages to P-subs, as we call them. And for instance, one of them is edge weighting. Come into edge component mode. I can select these edges here at the bottom, come into vertex map, edge weight tool, click in the viewport, and left click and drag. You can see the weight changes in the tool properties menu, set to like 30%. You see I've got a nice edge weight down there. And I can even go ahead and just select that poly if I want to, Alt X for local, scale that on out, and just start playing around with a lot of these different ways of building and controlling polygons. You also, even though we're going to talk about sculpting in the next video, you're going to open up the Sculpt Floating Tool palette here in the Model Quad view and grab tools like the Push Brush or the Move Brush and turn symmetry on, like turn it on along the X-axis. I've been careful. I'm pretty sure symmetry is intact currently. And I can just start using the sculpting tools to actually edit a subdivision mesh, which is very cool. Like I really like to actually put the move tool down to like 40%. That way we have a nice soft fall off as we're dragging. Really gives you almost nice added control in many ways. All right, so the next thing I want to do is create the actual blade component, right? So let's add an item, mesh item, and let's come on over to Basic, Cube Tool again, and now in the viewport, we're just going to left click. I'm going to undo that, left click and drag out, and create a polygon plane pretty much where the blade's going to be, and kind of make that fit the shape of our existing blade. Now, once it's kind of to a proportion you're happy with, just drop that poly, press the E key for rotate, and I have nothing selected, so everything is selected. I'm going to rotate that a little bit, Alt D for action center selection. And now I can press Shift plus Tab if I want to go into P-sub mode, but you notice it doesn't do anything because we only have one polygon. So press Shift plus D to subdivide our object with options and set your option to faceted, because if we do it with Catmull Clark or a different smoothing option, it will smooth your polys as it adds geometry. So Shift plus D and faceted, and you see it added geometry, but it didn't distort any of our existing geometry. Now I can press Shift plus Tab, and now we're in Pixar P-sub mode. And if we start moving some vertices around, you'll notice that we have nice kind of curves in place. And you can do this in any of the component modes, grab the different relevant components and start moving them around and designing the shape of your blade, as you can see, very quickly. This, of course, can also be done with these sculpting tools if you want like very, very quick controls. And if you need more geometry, if you come up with a shape that you're pretty happy with, but you need to fine tune that, just go ahead and subdivide that again, and you'll get exactly what you want. And so there we go. I've got a nice basic, blade shape I can start working with, and also a shape for a pull, but I need some thickness for my blade. And my blade is perfectly at the center of my scene, center of the x-axis. So I'll select all my edges or polygons or whatever, or none. W key for the move tool, and I'm going to try and move it off the center, but it can't because I have symmetry. So turn that off. W key for the move tool. Offset that just a little bit, and I'm going to close the sculpting tools briefly, and press Shift plus the V key, as in Victor, and that's underneath the duplicate menu right here. If you'll notice, we have our mirror options, and right here, mirror, Shift plus V. Click in the viewport, and you'll notice that it tried to mirror it. It also will join vertices, and it's not doing it exactly correctly. The reason why is our action center. It's at auto right now. It's using the object. So press Alt plus W to change your action center to origin. Click in the viewport, and you'll see it correctly mirrors across. If you need to change the axis, control is here. You have a lot of options with how you mirror. You can even tell it not to merge vertices, which is useful when you're generating your actual low poly geometry for the game. All right, so now we have two sides. Select edges on each side, just one edge on each side. Press L for the loop, another nice little selection tool, and come over to the edge bridge tool and click in the viewport, and that will bridge between those edges. You can do this between polys and all sorts of other stuff too. I'll show you in a minute. And let's increase our segments to 2. This way we have another edge in the center. Now hold down the Shift key. That lets us add to our selection. Select that edge right in the center, L for a loop, and it may select extra stuff. Just hold down the Control key to deselect any current selections. And also let's select this edge down here and this one, because we're going to use edge weighting on the blade. So vertex map, edge weight tool, click in the viewport. Now we have a 30% weight on all those edges. Now just select the edges in the center right there, deform and push, and now we're going to make a nice edge on our blade. And so there we go. Nice sharp crease quickly and easily. And we can continue kind of editing this shape however we want. Sculpting tools, whatever. Maybe you want the back of this blade to have a nice hard edge. Just select all those edges, vertex map, edge weight tool. You can see that nice edge weight that it produced back there. Just one of those things that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable. Sculpting tools, move. Let's turn symmetry on along the x-axis. So it continues to pull in the right direction. You can tweak and tune in really, really great ways. All right, so the shape that I ended up coming up with through this process, I'll turn these layers off, is this base form right here. And also, I created a very, very generic blade shape here, kind of just playing around with ideas. And after that, what I did is I started sculpting very early on. We're going to be talking about sculpting in the next video because we wanted to give you enough information as far as modeling is concerned. So as I zoom in, you'll notice I have a blade, and I started sculpting out the shape of the hood, things like the shoulders, just kind of roughly getting an idea of what I want to create. And move on to the next file, and I've added more geometry, exactly the same way I showed you. I added the other geometry. So adding handles and stuff like that, just getting an idea of how things look, taking the sculpting further, and let the blade in place. I really wasn't ready to go any further with that. And on up to this one. This is where I kind of settled on the blade shape, really happy with that form, and sculpted a little bit more, of course. And I'll go ahead and skip right on up to this 6th scene, because there's a bunch of things in here that are really important to articulate. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and shut off our master scene, so we only have one here. I've got these replicated details. This is super cool. All right, so you see these like lock boxes, because I had this idea like, all right, so we got this Reaper, and I wanted to have the actual handles be kind of like the clasps that are holding him in, so like locks and stuff like that, and chains. And what I did was I instanced meshes all over the existing mesh as details, because for a chain you only need one chain link, and if you can duplicate that, that's great. And instances don't use any more memory, so it's a way to add a lot more geometric detail that can be baked down as a normal map at the end, and without really any penalty as far as memory or performance overhead. It's much more resilient than just raw polygons. All right, so those chain links and lockbox are down here as base mesh items, and if I come into item mode and select that chain link, come into polygon component mode, if you'll notice, I'll zoom out really quickly, press the R key for scale, control. As I scale this in component mode, that will scale every item that is an instance. So really cool. And if I come into item mode, it will not happen. And we can move this, and that's because its transforms are recorded for the item itself, same as these are. All right, so how did I create that chain link? Just to show you really quickly, because creating objects like that are very simple in Modo, really. Again, we're back to the cube tool. We're really not doing anything but making cubes in this tutorial, are we? Come up to add item, mesh, and we got a new mesh item right there. Come over to the cube tool, and again, just hold down Control, click 1 meter cube, polygon, R, scale that on down, kind of get it to a scale you think you'd be happy with for the size of a chain link. Of course, we can continue to edit that. So I'll go ahead and pull this on outwards because we have symmetry. We use a transform tool here as I pull this with the move tool. You see it's maintaining the symmetry. Select a polygon on the top, one on the bottom. Come over to polygon bevel tool, click on that, click in the viewport, and left click and drag on in. So we have the extra geometry we need to make the shape of the chain. Press the spacebar to drop that, then polygon and bridge tool. And make sure remove polygons is on. Click in the viewport. You'll see remove those existing polys and merge them. And I will go ahead and reduce my segments to 0. And now I have the beginnings of a nice basic chain item. I selected all my polys by selecting 1 and pressing the right bracket. R key for scale, scale that on down, press Shift Tab for P-sub mode. And I can select all my polygons right inside of here and kind of start scaling those in to get a better chain link shape. Select an edge. I have symmetry on. Alt-C for loop slice under the mesh edit menu. Click on the viewport. Wow, way too many. And see, that's the thing about adding geometry. If you'll notice, as you on a P-sub mesh, as you add geometry, it makes the corners tighter and it makes your existing forms straighter. So what we need to do is just kind of stick with 1, find out what count produces the shape we want, which one does. All right, so there we go. I am, for the most part, happy with that chain shape, and I can go ahead and kind of tweak that a little bit further. Once I'm happy with that, take a look at it. Way too large. Symmetry off. Scale it on down with the Control key. Item mode. Instance that item and move it on up into place to where I want to begin my chain link. Now you can also use duplication tools underneath the duplicate menu, like duplicate along curves, stuff like that. But in the case of like the forms that I've created here, it was kind of easier just to move these items into place, because once I get the initial chain into place, the orientation is really easy to kind of figure out. Like for instance, just tweak and tune that into place, right click, duplicate, move that on up, and rotate it on around. And so it actually was kind of a convenient way of being able to deal with this. And so I'll shut these off really quickly. I also modeled these handles in the same exact way as I modeled the pole, just some basic bevels and things of that sort. And if I come up here to my individual handles, you'll notice that I did a couple different iterations and actually modeled in some really nice fine details that use edge weighting, things of that sort, until I arrived at a handle design that I was really happy with. And in the end, it kind of changed quite a bit. I ended up with this, crazy, crazy face on my actual final model. And I'll come over here to this file really quickly to show you. You see, here's the handle of the final object. There's actually like dragon scales on top of this. And to show you some of the stuff a little bit more clearly, add layer, material. You can do this in your scene if, for instance, you have a whole lot of materials and it's hard to see stuff. Add a material right at the top and it will override everything. And now you can see all your different mesh layers, and that is the end of my sculpting and my modeling. The next video, we will be talking about sculpting, and that will overlap this video in many ways, but there's a lot of things having to do with modeling that I couldn't even get into in this 25-minute video. Really kind of just play around with the modeling tools. Check out some of our other videos. They're extraordinary, they're painful, and hopefully from this you can see they're very easy.